My oldest son always forbade me from entering the private ranch he bought after suddenly becoming wealthy from his investments. When he was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, his financial advisor handed me the master key, saying my son wanted me to know the truth. I drove there expecting to find documents or money, but when I opened the door to the ranch house, my legs went weak because inside there was something that made me fall to my knees. They say you never truly know your own children, but I thought Marcus and I were different. We'd been a team since his mother passed, just the two of us against the world. That's why when the hospital called at 3 a.m. to tell me my son was in critical condition, the shock wasn't just about his injuries. It was about the stranger in the expensive suit waiting for me in the hallway, holding a key I'd never seen before. Have you ever had someone look at you like they're carrying a secret that could destroy you? Have you ever felt that cold dread when you realized the person you loved most had been living a completely different life? I had both answers within 5 minutes of arriving at County General, and neither answer brought me any comfort. The man introduced himself as Thomas Berkeley, Marcus's financial advisor. My son, who 3 years ago was eating ramen noodles in a studio apartment, had a financial advisor in a $2,000 suit. Thomas's handshake was firm, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. The doctors had already told me Marcus was in surgery. Internal bleeding, broken ribs, severe head trauma from what they called a single vehicle accident on a rural highway. "Mr. Garrett," Thomas said, his voice low and carefully measured, "your son gave me specific instructions. If anything ever happened to him, I was to give you this." He pressed a heavy brass key into my palm, along with a folded piece of paper containing an address I didn't recognize. It's a property he purchased 6 months ago, a ranch about 2 hours north of here. I stared at the key, my mind spinning. A ranch? Marcus never said anything about... He made me promise, Thomas interrupted, and for the first time he looked directly at me. There was something in his expression that made my stomach drop. Not pity, fear. He made me promise to only give this to you if something happened to him. But Mr. Garrett... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Maybe some doors are better left closed. Then he walked away, leaving me standing in that fluorescent hospital corridor, holding a key to my son's secret life. The drive to the ranch felt like descending into someone else's nightmare. I left the hospital once the doctors assured me Marcus was stable, though they couldn't promise anything beyond the next 24 hours. The key sat heavy in my jacket pocket, and Thomas Berkeley's warning played on repeat in my mind. Maybe some doors are better left closed. What kind of thing do you say to a father about his own son? I tried calling Marcus's phone, knowing it was pointless. It rang once before going to voicemail, and hearing his voice on the recording nearly made me pull over. "Hey, it's Marcus. You know what to do." So casual, so normal. The same voice that used to call me every Sunday morning without fail. Except those calls had stopped about 6 months ago, right around the time everything changed. The highway stretched endlessly before me, and my mind drifted back to the day Marcus showed up at my house in a brand new Tesla. Midnight blue, the kind of car we used to joke about when he was a kid. "Look at that, Dad," he'd say, pointing at luxury vehicles in parking lots. "Someday, when I'm rich and famous." We'd laugh because it seemed impossible for a freelance photographer scraping by on wedding gigs and corporate headshots. But there he was, keys in hand, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "Got lucky with some investments," he said when I asked. The same answer he gave when he paid off my mortgage 2 weeks later. The same answer when I saw him wearing a watch that cost more than my first car. I'd been so grateful, so proud, that I didn't push. Maybe I didn't want to know. Maybe some part of me understood that the truth would complicate the gift. Marcus had always been secretive about his work, even before the money. He'd disappear for days, sometimes weeks, with vague explanations about photo assignments in other cities. I figured it was just the nature of his business. But 6 months ago, the disappearances became longer, the phone calls became shorter, and when I did see him, there was something different in his eyes, something watchful and tired that reminded me of soldiers I'd known who'd come back from war. The last time I saw my son in person was 3 weeks ago. He'd stopped by for dinner, picking at his food and checking his phone constantly. I asked him if everything was okay, if the money was legitimate, if he was in some kind of trouble. Marcus looked at me then with an expression I couldn't read. "Dad, "Everything I've done has been to protect you," he said. "You have to trust me on that." I told him I did trust him. I told him I just wanted to understand what was happening. That's when he mentioned the ranch for the first and only time. "I bought some property up north," he said. "It's private. Somewhere I can work without interruptions." Then he gripped my hand across the table harder than necessary. "Promise me you'll never come there uninvited. Promise me, Dad." I promised because that's what you do when your child asks. You trust them, even when every instinct screams that something is wrong. You give them space because you remember being young and wanting your own life, your own secrets. You tell yourself they'll explain when they're ready. The GPS announced I was 10 miles from my destination. The landscape had shifted from suburbs to farmland to something more isolated. Fewer houses, more trees, roads that hadn't been repaved in years. I passed a faded sign advertising fresh eggs at a farm that looked abandoned. This was where Marcus had chosen to hide whatever he was hiding. My phone buzzed. A text from the hospital. "No change in condition. We'll call if anything develops." I typed back a quick thank you and noticed my hands were shaking. Not from fear of what I might find at the ranch, though that was certainly there, but from the growing realization that my son had been living an entire existence I knew nothing about. That the money, the distance, the secrecy, it was all connected to something that had put him in the ICU with injuries the doctors said looked like he'd been beaten before the crash. The GPS announced my arrival. I turned onto an unmarked dirt road, and through the trees ahead I could see buildings. The ranch appeared through a break in the trees like something out of a different world. Not the rustic, charming kind you see in magazines. This was functional, almost clinical. A main house painted in neutral gray, 2 smaller outbuildings, and a barn that looked newer than everything else. High fencing surrounded the entire property, the kind with privacy slats that prevented anyone from seeing in or out. I parked next to what I recognized as Marcus's truck, covered in a thin layer of dust. He'd been gone from here for at least a few days before the accident. The silence pressed against my ears as I stepped out. No birdsong, no distant traffic, nothing. Just wind moving through pine trees and the sound of my own breathing. The brass key felt cold in my hand as I approached the front door. Part of me wanted to turn around, drive back to the hospital, and pretend Thomas Berkeley had never given me this address. But Marcus was lying in an ICU bed with machines breathing for him, and whatever he'd been protecting me from didn't matter anymore. I needed to understand what my son had become. The key turned smoothly. The door opened into darkness. I fumbled for a light switch, and fluorescent panels flickered to life overhead. What I saw made me freeze in the doorway. This wasn't a home. The main room had been converted into something else entirely. Where you'd expect a couch and television, there were folding tables covered in computer monitors, 3 of them, all dark. Professional photography equipment lined one wall, lenses and cameras that must have cost tens of thousands of dollars. But it was the far wall that made my breath catch. Missing persons posters, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They covered the entire surface from floor to ceiling, overlapping like scales on some horrible creature. Young women, mostly. Some men, different ages, different races, different cities. Each face stared out with that same desperate hope you see in those posters, the plea that someone, somewhere, knows something. I moved closer, my legs unsteady. Some of the posters had red X marks across them. Others had dates written in Marcus's handwriting, coordinates, question marks. A few had photographs pinned next to them, candid shots that Marcus must have taken himself. Street scenes, parking lots, strip malls. In each photo, someone was circled in red ink. My son had been tracking people, hunting them. The thought made me physically ill. I stumbled backward and noticed a doorway leading to what should have been a bedroom. Inside, I found more evidence of Marcus's obsession. Corkboards covered 3 walls, connected by red string in patterns that made no sense to me. Photographs of men in suits getting into cars. License plate numbers written on index cards. Screenshots of social media profiles. Bank statements with certain transactions highlighted. One board was dedicated entirely to a blonde woman in her early 20s. I counted at least 50 photographs of her, taken over what looked like months. Getting coffee, walking to a gym, standing outside an apartment building. But these weren't romantic or predatory. They were surveillance, clinical documentation of someone's movements. At the center of the board was a newspaper clipping. Sarah Mitchell, 23, missing since March 2024. Beneath it, in Marcus's handwriting, found, returned, payment received. My knees gave out and I sat hard on the floor. Payment received. The money. The sudden fortune that had changed everything. Marcus had been finding missing people. But that didn't explain the fear in Thomas Berkeley's eyes, or the way Marcus had begged me never to come here, or the fact that someone had beaten him badly enough to put him in critical condition. I forced myself to stand and continue searching. The next room was smaller, set up like an office. File cabinets, a desk, a safe bolted to the floor. On the desk sat a leather journal, open to the last entry. Marcus's handwriting, dated 4 days ago. They know I'm getting close. Found the warehouse location outside Portland. Can't involve police until I have proof. Berkeley says the family needs closure, not just accusations. Going to document everything tomorrow night. If something happens, the evidence is in the basement. Dad, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The basement. I hadn't seen stairs leading down. I walked back through the main room, really looking this time, and spotted it. A door I'd mistaken for a closet secured with a padlock that looked brand new. The brass key didn't fit. This lock required something else. I tore through the main room looking for another key, pulling open drawers and checking under equipment. Nothing. My hands were shaking now, a combination of adrenaline and the growing dread of what I might find below. Marcus's journal entry played in my mind on repeat. If something happens, the evidence is in the basement. He'd known they were coming for him. He'd written those words knowing he might not survive. The office. I ran back and examined the safe bolted to the floor. It was a digital model with a keypad. I tried Marcus's birthday. Wrong. My birthday. Wrong. The day his mother died. The lock beeped angrily and displayed a warning about security lockout. One more wrong attempt and I'd be locked out entirely. I closed my eyes and thought about my son. What number would he choose for something this important? Then it came to me. The address of our old house, the one where he grew up, where his mother had lived. 4739. I punched in the numbers and held my breath. The safe clicked open. Inside was a small key attached to a tag that read basement, along with stacks of cash, a pistol I didn't know Marcus owned, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. I grabbed the key and the envelope, leaving everything else. My hands fumbled with the basement padlock, dropping the key twice before I managed to get it in. The lock opened and I pulled the door wide. Stairs descended into darkness. I found a switch and lights came on below, revealing concrete steps leading down into what looked like a finished basement. The air that rose up smelled stale and recycled, like the ventilation down there ran on its own system. I descended slowly, gripping the railing. With each step, I could see more of the space below. This wasn't storage. This was a command center. The basement was larger than the entire footprint of the house above, extending out in directions that didn't make architectural sense. Marcus must have excavated and built this in secret, which explained why the barn looked so new. He'd needed somewhere to hide the construction. The main area contained 6 large monitors mounted on the wall, each displaying a frozen image. Security camera footage from different locations. I recognized one as the warehouse Marcus mentioned in his journal. The others showed various buildings, parking structures, shipping yards. Beneath the monitors sat a professional editing station with hard drives labeled by date and location. To my left, a long table held printed photographs arranged in sequence like frames from a film. I moved closer and my stomach turned. These weren't surveillance photos. They were documentation of something much worse. Women being moved between vehicles. Men exchanging briefcases in parking garages. A shipping container being loaded onto a truck, and in one zoomed-in shot, a hand pressed against a small ventilation gap. Someone trapped inside. Marcus had documented a human trafficking network. That's what this was. That's what all of it was. I stumbled to a chair and sat down hard, the envelope from the safe still clutched in my hand. My son wasn't a predator. He was hunting predators. The missing persons posters upstairs, the surveillance photos, the coordinates and dates. He'd been tracking these people, finding victims, documenting the operation, and someone had discovered what he was doing. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter in Marcus's handwriting, along with a USB drive and a business card for a detective, Sarah Chen, with Portland PD. Dad, if you're reading this, I'm either dead or close to it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for lying, for disappearing, for making you worry. But I couldn't tell you. Not because I didn't trust you, but because knowing would have put you in danger. 2 years ago, I was hired to take photos at a corporate event. That's where I met James Mitchell. His daughter Sarah had been missing for 8 months. Police had given up. He was desperate. He offered me $50,000 if I could find any trace of her. I almost said no. But I kept thinking about Mom, about losing her, about what I would have paid for one more day. I found Sarah in 3 weeks. She'd been trafficked, moved through 6 states, ended up in a brothel in Seattle. I got her out and documented everyone involved in the process. James paid me $500,000. Then his friends started calling. Other families, other missing daughters and sons. The money piled up, and I couldn't stop because each face I found was someone's child. But I got too good at it. I started recognizing patterns, networks, the same faces in different cities. I wasn't just finding victims anymore. I was mapping an entire operation. And they noticed. The letter continued, but I had to stop reading. My vision blurred with tears. My son, my beautiful, careful, compassionate son, had been saving lives while I'd worried about where his money came from. I wiped my eyes and kept reading. The final paragraph made my blood run cold. The USB drive contains everything. Locations of 3 active sites, identities of 15 key players, financial records, shipping schedules, enough to dismantle the entire Pacific Northwest operation and save dozens of people still in captivity. Detective Chen is clean, I've verified it. She's been investigating the same network from her end but doesn't have the evidence to move. But Dad, giving this to her will paint a target on your back. These people have money, connections, and nothing to lose. They beat me and ran me off the road for getting too close. They'll do worse to you if they know you have this information. So I'm giving you a choice I pray you never have to make. You can take the money from the safe, burn everything in this ranch and walk away. Live the quiet life I always wanted for you. Or you can finish what I started and accept that your life will never be safe again. I won't blame you either way. You've already sacrificed enough, raising me alone after Mom died. You deserve peace. Whatever you choose, know that I love you. You were the best father I could have asked for. I'm sorry I couldn't be honest with you at the end. I'm sorry for all of it. Love, Marcus. I sat in that basement for a long time, the letter in one hand and the USB drive in the other. The monitors on the wall stared at me with their frozen images of suffering. How many people were in those buildings right now, waiting for someone to save them? How many families were living the nightmare that James Mitchell had escaped? My phone rang, and I nearly dropped everything. The hospital. I answered with shaking hands. Mr. Garrett, this is Dr. Patel. I wanted to update you on Marcus's condition. He's stable, and we've successfully stopped the internal bleeding. He's not out of danger yet, but his odds are improving. We're cautiously optimistic. The relief hit me like a physical force. When can I see him? He's in recovery now. Give us a few hours to get him settled in ICU. But Mr. Garrett, there's something you should know. When he briefly regained consciousness during surgery, he kept repeating something. He kept saying, "Tell my dad to let it go." Does that mean anything to you? I looked at the USB drive. Yes, it means everything. I thanked the doctor and ended the call. Marcus was alive. He was going to survive. And even in his delirium, semi-conscious and broken, he was trying to protect me, begging me to walk away, to choose safety over justice, to let his work die with his injuries. That's what a good son does. He sacrifices himself so his father can live without fear. But what does a good father do? I stood up and walked to the editing station. It took me 20 minutes to figure out Marcus's system, but I managed to copy everything from the hard drives onto 3 additional USB drives I found in a drawer. 4 copies total. Insurance. I called the number on Detective Chen's card. It rang 4 times before a woman answered, cautious. "Chen." "Detective, my name is Robert Garrett. You don't know me, but I believe my son Marcus has been in contact with you about a trafficking investigation." Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, "Is Marcus all right?" "He's in the hospital. Someone tried to kill him 3 days ago. But before that, he compiled evidence. Everything you need to move on the operation. I have it." "Mr. Garrett, if you're involved in this, you need protection. These people, I know what these people are capable of. I'm looking at my son's blood work right now, but there are victims in those locations who don't have time for me to worry about my safety. Marcus found them. I'm asking you to save them." We arranged to meet at the hospital in 3 hours. She'd bring federal agents. I'd bring the evidence. She warned me again about the danger, about witness protection, about what this would mean for my life. I told her I understood. I took 1 USB drive and left 3 hidden in the basement just in case. Then I walked back upstairs and looked at the wall of missing persons posters one last time. Some of those faces Marcus had saved. Others he'd run out of time to help, but the evidence I was carrying could finish his work. On my way out, I paused at the door. Marcus had built this place to protect me from the truth. He'd lived a double life, accumulated wealth and secrets, all while trying to keep me safe and ignorant. And maybe that was love in its own way. But love isn't just about protection. Sometimes it's about finishing what the people we love started, even when they beg us not to. It's about looking at an impossible choice and deciding that some things matter more than safety. I locked the ranch behind me and drove back toward the hospital, toward my son, toward Detective Chen and federal agents and a future I couldn't predict. Marcus would be angry when he woke up and learned what I'd done. He'd tell me I was foolish, reckless, that I'd thrown away the peaceful life he'd bought with his blood. And I'd tell him what he already knew but needed to hear again, that he didn't raise himself, that the man who taught him about sacrifice and doing what's right even when it's hard was lying in a hospital bed because he'd lived those values to their logical conclusion. I'd tell him I was proud, that I understood, and that some choices aren't impossible at all. They're just hard, and we make them anyway. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to our channel. Every week we share powerful stories about sacrifice, redemption, and the choices that define us. Your support helps us continue bringing these emotional journeys to life. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of listeners who believe that every story deserves to be heard.